Have you ever walked into a room and felt like you didn't belong, even though it was your own family's event? That's exactly how it felt stepping onto the sand that afternoon in Malibu. The sun was golden, the waves gentle, the air warm. Everything looked perfect, the kind of wedding people post on Instagram and call a dream. But inside, I carried this tight knot, the same one I had felt since childhood. You know that voice that whispers, "They don't really want you here?" That was the soundtrack in my head. I watched my younger sister Isabella twirl in her gown, every eye on her, every compliment flowing her way. Guests leaned in, whispering about how radiant she looked, how lucky she was. I smiled, nodded, tried to blend into the background. That's what I had always done. Make myself small so I wouldn't get in the way. But you can't really hide at a wedding like this. Malibu isn't subtle. White tents billowed in the ocean breeze. Crystal glasses clinked under chandeliers that seemed too extravagant for a beach. The smell of roses mixed with salt air. Waiters floated by with trays of champagne. Laughter carried over the surf, and every laugh seemed louder when it wasn't mine. And then there was my father, Daniel, the man who could silence a room with a look, who knew how to turn charm on and off like a faucet. He wore a tailored navy suit that matched the Pacific behind him. To everyone else, he was the proud father of the bride, gracious host of a lavish ceremony. To me, he was the man who had never once believed I was enough. You might think I'm exaggerating, but when you've grown up in the shadow of a golden child, you learn to read the smallest expressions, a raised eyebrow, a sigh too sharp. Words sharpened just enough to draw blood without leaving a mark. That's the language I spoke fluently. As the guests took their seats, I sat toward the back, close enough to be counted, far enough not to be noticed. My mother adjusted Isabella's veil, cooing over every detail. She didn't glance at me once, and honestly, I didn't expect her to. Still, part of me held out hope. Maybe today would be different. Maybe, just once, my father would look at me and not see a disappointment. Maybe he would just see his daughter, but hope is a dangerous thing at a wedding like that. The music swelled, the ceremony unfolded, and for a while, I let myself get lost in the rhythm. The vows, the applause, the kiss, it was all picture perfect. Guests wiped away tears, phones flashing as they captured the moment. I clapped too, but quietly, like I was afraid of drawing attention to myself. Then came the reception. Tables groaned under towers of seafood and champagne fountains. A string quartet played as people drifted onto the dance floor. My father, ever the master of ceremonies, tapped a spoon against his glass. The crowd hushed, eyes turned toward him. He started with compliments. Isabella's beauty, her grace, the bright future ahead with her new husband. People smiled, nodded, raised their glasses. Then his gaze shifted to me, and in that instant, I knew. The knot in my chest pulled tight. I recognized that glint in his eye. He wasn't just giving a toast. He was setting a stage. "You know," he said, his voice carrying over the crowd. "It's remarkable how one child can bring such pride, and another can still be searching." Laughter rippled through the guests. Some looked at me, then quickly away. I froze, glass in hand. He wasn't finished. "Claire's here, of course." 32 years old and still, well, let's just say she hasn't quite found her place yet. But isn't it wonderful that Isabella did? Every word landed like a slap. My cheeks burned. I wanted to sink into the sand, vanish beneath the waves. I forced a smile, but my throat ached. The crowd chuckled again, awkward and uneasy, but no one stopped him. No one ever did. And that was just the beginning. Because when my father stepped down from the stage, he didn't stop at words. He walked past me, leaned close enough for only me to hear. "Try not to ruin her night," he whispered. Then with one sharp push, he shoved me backward, straight into the ocean surf. The cold water swallowed me whole. Gasps, laughter, camera flashes. It all blurred together. Salt stung my eyes. Dress clung heavy against my skin. When I surfaced, hair plastered to my face, the sound of laughter was louder than the waves. And I'll tell you something. In that moment, I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just looked up at my father standing dry on the shore, the smug grin on his face, the crowd still chuckling nervously, and I thought, remember this. Every one of you, remember this. Because something was about to change. There's a silence that hurts more than words. The kind that falls when people see something cruel, laugh a little, then look away because it's easier not to get involved. That was the silence I felt after dragging myself out of the surf, dripping, shivering, mascara streaked like black rivers down my cheeks. I could still hear the clinking of glasses, the polite coughs, the awkward attempts at laughter that masked discomfort. Some people actually reached for their phones, snapping pictures like it was some staged performance. I wanted to scream, but the scream lodged in my throat. My father, Daniel, never turned back. He walked straight to the bar, as if pushing me into the ocean was as ordinary as ordering another drink. My mother fluttered after him, whispering something in his ear. Not one glance in my direction. Isabella, my radiant bride of a sister, avoided my eyes entirely. I squeezed water out of my dress, trembling in the cool breeze, trying to hold myself together. The salt burned my skin, but it was the shame that stung deeper. You've probably had that moment too, when the people who should protect you are the ones tearing you apart. It's like the world splits in two, the version everyone else sees, and the reality you carry inside. I walked barefoot back to the edge of the crowd, sand sticking to my soaked clothes. Conversations picked up again, laughter spilling louder as if nothing had happened. I was invisible, or worse, an entertainment. Then I heard it. A whisper behind me, sharp as a knife. She's always been a mess. Another voice, hushed but cruel. Isabella deserved all the spotlight. Claire, she's just an afterthought. They didn't even lower their voices enough. Maybe they wanted me to hear. Maybe that was the point. I stood there, heart pounding, remembering all the other times I'd been labeled the disappointment. Report cards compared, college choices mocked, jobs dismissed as phases, birthdays forgotten. Even as an adult, I was treated like the trial run, while Isabella was the masterpiece. That's the thing about public humiliation. It's never just about the moment. It rips open every scar you thought you'd healed. My aunt approached me then, smile too wide, voice too sugary. Oh dear, don't take it personally. You know how your father is. She patted my damp shoulder, leaving a sticky mark of pity, then drifted away before I could respond. I wanted to disappear. But the worst part? A part of me believed them. That maybe I really was a failure. Maybe I deserved the shove, the laughter, the whispers. Because when you've been told you're not enough your whole life, it starts to feel like truth. But another part of me, small but stubborn, whispered something different. Not this time. I slipped away from the crowd, walking toward the edge of the beach where the noise dimmed and the sound of the waves returned. My dress clung heavy, hair dripping salt water down my back. I closed my eyes and let the ocean drown out the laughter. And that's when it hit me. Humiliation is fuel. It either breaks you or it sharpens you. My father thought he had written the ending of my story right there in front of everyone. But what he didn't know was that he had just set the stage for something he couldn't control. I whispered it to myself, like a promise. They'll see who I really am. Behind me, the music swelled again. The crowd toasted, danced, celebrated. But I stayed at the edge of the sand, staring at the horizon, letting the cold wind clear my head. Every nerve in me was raw, but underneath the pain was a fire. Because humiliation isn't just about shame. It's about the choice you make afterward. Do you shrink smaller or do you stand taller? I knew what I had to do. I stayed near the shoreline longer than I should have, shivering in the cooling air. The reception lights glowed behind me, casting the whole wedding in a warm haze I couldn't step back into. I dug my toes into the sand, grounding myself, reminding myself I was still here, still breathing, still standing. When I finally turned back, I walked slowly, deliberately, like I was trying to buy time. My dress was ruined, so I slipped inside one of the side tents where the staff kept supplies. A kind waiter handed me a towel, his eyes soft with sympathy, but he didn't say a word. Sometimes silence is kinder than empty phrases. I found a backup dress, something simple I had packed just in case. Isn't it strange how we prepare for storms without even realizing it? I peeled off the soaked fabric, dried myself, and slid into the clean dress. It wasn't glamorous, but it was dry, and it felt like a shield. In the mirror, I barely recognized the woman staring back. Mascara gone, hair tangled, but there was something steadier in my eyes. A quiet defiance, the kind of look that says, "Go ahead, try again." I stepped out of the tent, the hum of voices swelling as I moved closer to the reception. From a distance, the scene was unchanged. Guests drinking, music floating, my father laughing like nothing had happened. It made me want to laugh too, not from joy, but from the absurdity of it all. You know what's funny? Sometimes the calmest moments come right before the ground shifts under your feet. And that's what this was. A pause, a breath, before everything turned. I spotted Isabella across the dance floor, radiant in her gown, arm linked with her new husband. She looked at me for the briefest second, eyes flicking with something sharp, embarrassment, annoyance, maybe even guilt. But then she turned away, as if I were nothing more than a shadow. That tiny glance fueled me. It reminded me of every time she had been crowned the favorite, every time I had been told to be more like your sister. Tonight, though, the story was about to change. I didn't head back into the crowd. Instead, I found a spot near the entrance, close to the edge of the sand where the sound of the waves could still reach me. I stood tall, listening as the laughter carried on, knowing what was about to happen. Because here's the truth. I wasn't just waiting to dry off. I was waiting for someone. You ever keep a secret so long that it starts to feel like armor? That's how I felt about my life outside this family. They thought they knew me, thought I was the same girl they could push around, belittle, ignore. They had no idea. The calm stretched, minutes ticking by. My hands tightened around the strap of my bag, my heart beating steady now, not frantic like before. Every laugh from inside the tent only sharpened my resolve. I thought back to the years I had built quietly, away from their judgment. The nights I stayed up studying when they said I was wasting time. The mornings I dragged myself to work, grinding through doubt and debt. The missions I had taken on, the risks no one at that wedding could even imagine. They had dismissed all of it as nothing. But soon, the truth would step into their carefully curated world. I whispered to myself, not loud enough for anyone else to hear. They'll see who I really am, and they won't laugh this time. Behind me, the ocean roared louder, like it agreed, and then, faint at first, came the sound that would change everything. The low, steady thrum of helicopter blades cutting through the sky. At first, it was just a faint hum in the distance, so soft I thought maybe I imagined it. But then it grew louder, deeper, a steady rhythm beating against the sky. Heads turned upward, conversations faltered, and for the first time all night, the attention shifted away from Isabella's wedding. The helicopter cut through the sunset, its blades slicing the air like a drum roll. The sound was impossible to ignore. Champagne flutes trembled on trays as waiters paused mid-step. Even my father, so sure of his grip on the room, glanced up with a crease between his brows. I felt the corners of my mouth lift. Not into a smile exactly, but into something steadier. Something that said, "This is the moment I was waiting for." The helicopter circled once over the coastline, lights flashing against the waves, before descending toward the stretch of sand just beyond the reception tents. Guests rushed to the edges, their phones raised high, whispers tumbling over each other. "Who is that? Is someone famous here? Is this part of the wedding?" The rotor wash hit us, whipping hair, tugging at gowns, sending napkins skittering across tables. I stood tall, letting the wind press against me. The chill of the ocean water on my skin had long dried, replaced with a different kind of electricity. When the helicopter landed, the blade slowed, and from inside stepped a man in a sharp black suit. He moved with a calm confidence that commanded attention without effort. Sunglasses on, posture straight, like he belonged everywhere he went. Adrian. To me, he wasn't just my husband. He was the steady presence that had believed in me when no one else did. The man who knew every scar I carried and never once called them weaknesses. But to the crowd, in that instant, he was a mystery they couldn't wait to solve. He removed his sunglasses, scanning the crowd, and then his eyes found mine. In that look, the entire night shifted. My shame evaporated. My father's cruelty, the guests' laughter, Isabella's smug silence. It all shrank compared to the quiet power of that connection. Adrian walked forward, the sand crunching under his shoes, and people instinctively parted to make way. My father's face hardened, his charm cracking as unease slipped through. He tried to mask it with a laugh, but it was too thin, too forced. "Claire," Adrian said, his voice carrying easily over the crowd. Just my name, simple and steady. But in that moment, it sounded like a declaration. I stepped toward him, every eye following. The whispers grew louder. "That's Claire's husband? When did she—" "Is that—" Adrian reached for my hand, lifting it as if to show me off, and murmured just loud enough for me to hear, "Ready?" And I was. Because what they didn't know yet was that Adrian wasn't just some wealthy man stepping off a helicopter. He was the founder of one of Silicon Valley's most powerful security firms, a man whose face appeared in Forbes profiles and financial magazines. His name carried weight in boardrooms from San Francisco to New York, and here he was, at my side. The crowd buzzed like bees. Phones were out, flashes exploding in the dusk. Adrian turned slightly, addressing the people nearest to us. "I apologize for interrupting. I couldn't let my wife face this evening alone." The word wife rippled through the crowd. Gasps, stunned faces, mouths falling open. My father's eyes narrowed. "Wife?" he repeated, as if tasting the word for poison. He turned to me, disbelief etched in every line. "You married without telling us?" I held his gaze. For the first time, I wasn't shrinking under it. "Yes," I said simply, "because not everything about my life revolves around your approval." The silence that followed was different from before, not cruel, not mocking. This was stunned, unsettled. A silence born of realization. Behind us, the helicopter blades slowed to a stop. The air was still charged, humming with the weight of what had just happened. Adrian's presence had shifted the balance, and everyone knew it. Guests leaned closer to each other, whispering frantically. Some stared at me with new eyes, like they were seeing me for the first time. Isabella's perfect smile had frozen, her hand tightening on her husband's arm. And me? I stood taller than I ever had, hand in Adrian's, the shame washed away by the steady roar of his arrival. This was only the beginning. There's a certain electricity in the air when the truth is about to break free. You can almost feel it humming under your skin. That's what I felt as Adrian kept my hand in his, steadying me like a lighthouse in a storm. The crowd was still buzzing, restless, whispering, their curiosity clawing at them. And my father? His jaw clenched so hard, I thought his teeth might shatter. Adrian glanced around, then spoke in that calm, deliberate tone of his. "I think there's been a misunderstanding," he said. "Most of you know me as Adrian Reed. Some of you may have read about Reed Technologies." The murmur grew louder. Of course they had. Reed Technologies wasn't just any company. It was a cornerstone of digital security, a name tied to billion-dollar contracts, government partnerships, cutting-edge research. Even those who didn't follow tech news had at least scrolled past his face in an article or two. My father blinked, his mouth twitching as he tried to process what was happening. Adrian squeezed my hand once before continuing. "But what most of you probably don't know is that the woman you've dismissed, mocked, and—" His eyes flicked sharply toward my father. "Humiliated tonight is not only my wife. She's also one of the youngest assistant directors in the history of the FBI's counterintelligence division." Gasps erupted. Actual gasps, sharp and uncontained, like a wave crashing into the room. The music faltered as the string quartet trailed off mid-note. Every face turned toward me, eyes wide, jaws slack. For a second, the world froze. And then the whispers exploded. "FBI?" Did he say assistant director? "She's with him?" Wait, is this real? I stood there, the heat rising in my chest, but it wasn't shame this time. It was vindication, pure, unfiltered. My father stammered, voice cracking. That's absurd. Claire, she couldn't possibly. She's never. Adrian cut him off with a calm but lethal tone. "Daniel, you've underestimated her for far too long, but facts don't lie." He gestured to the security detail that had stepped out of the helicopter behind him, men and women in dark suits, earpieces glinting under the reception lights. They weren't just for show. The guests craned their necks, snapping pictures, trying to reconcile the dripping, humiliated woman from earlier with the figure standing tall now. My soaked humiliation had been replaced with something else entirely. Proof. My mother finally found her voice, brittle and sharp. Why would she keep this from us? Why wouldn't she share her accomplishments? I looked directly at her. Because every time I tried, you made it clear you didn't care. You only valued me if I was in Isabella's shadow. So I stopped trying to prove myself to people who didn't want to see me. Isabella's face twisted. Her perfect smile shattered into something raw. She grabbed her husband's arm tighter, as if anchoring herself. "This is ridiculous," she hissed. But even she didn't sound convinced. Adrian's voice carried again, calm but commanding. "Tonight was supposed to be about family. But instead, it turned into a spectacle of cruelty. You thought you could humiliate her without consequence. But here's the truth. Claire doesn't need your approval. She never did. Silence. Heavy, suffocating silence. Not the kind that mocks, but the kind that admits defeat." I let my eyes sweep across the crowd. The same guests who had laughed at me earlier now looked away in shame or stared at me with something that almost resembled respect. Phones lowered. Murmurs died down. For the first time in my life, I wasn't invisible. I was undeniable. I stepped forward, voice steady. "You wanted to make me the joke tonight. But you just reminded me why I stopped trying to earn your applause. I don't need it. I know who I am." Every word landed with weight, not just on my family, but on me, because saying it out loud was a release I didn't know I'd been waiting for. My father opened his mouth again, but no sound came out. He stood there, fists clenched, the power he had always wielded slipping through his fingers like sand. The crowd shifted uncomfortably, waiting for him to recover, but he couldn't, because for once, the truth was bigger than his pride. And me? I wasn't hiding anymore. This was my reveal. The lights from the reception flickered across the sand, but I no longer felt drawn to them. For once, I wasn't desperate to be included. I wasn't chasing my father's approval, or my mother's rare nods of acknowledgement, or my sister's backhanded compliments. I had nothing left to prove. Not to them, not tonight, not ever again. Adrian's hand was still in mine, warm and steady, and that was all I needed. Together, we turned away from the stunned crowd. The air smelled of salt and roses, and the sound of the ocean swallowed the whispers behind us. Step by step, the laughter that had once stung me faded into nothing more than background noise. Do you know what freedom feels like? It isn't fireworks or loud declarations. It's the quiet certainty that you no longer owe anyone your pain. That's what I carried with me as we walked across the sand. Behind us, I heard chairs scraping, voices rising. Some tried to call my name. My mother's brittle tone cut through the night. "Claire, wait, don't walk away like this." But I didn't stop. Not because I was angry, but because I was done. There's a difference. Anger ties you to the people who hurt you. Being done severs the cord. I thought back to the girl I had been just an hour earlier, dripping from the ocean, shame clinging to me like seaweed. That version of me would have stayed, hoping someone, anyone, would come to her defense. But not this time. Tonight, I defended myself. We reached the edge of the property, where the sand met the darker stretch of coast. The helicopter waited, its lights glowing softly. Adrian looked at me, his eyes searching. "You okay?" I exhaled slowly, the breath I'd been holding for years. "Better than okay," I whispered. "I feel free." He smiled, the kind of smile that carried more belief than words ever could. We climbed into the helicopter, the blades roaring back to life. As it lifted off, I glanced down at the scene shrinking below. The white tents, the glittering lights, the tiny figures scrambling like ants. My father stood rigid, my mother clutching her pearls. Isabella frozen in disbelief. The higher we rose, the smaller they became. And with every foot of distance, I felt lighter. I didn't feel like the family disappointment anymore. I didn't feel like the shadow. I felt like myself, whole, strong, no longer tethered to their opinions. The coastline stretched out in both directions, endless and open. For the first time in my life, the future didn't scare me. It felt wide, waiting. Here's the truth. Walking away isn't weakness. Sometimes it's the bravest thing you can do. Staying, fighting for scraps of validation, pretending that cruelty is love, that's what drains you. Leaving, that's what saves you. As Malibu's lights faded into the horizon, I pressed my forehead against the cool glass and let the hum of the helicopter settle into me. I wasn't running away. I was stepping into a life I had already built, a life that didn't depend on anyone's permission. And maybe, just maybe, that's the kind of ending that isn't an ending at all. It's a beginning. I thought leaving would be the end of it. I thought rising above the humiliation, stepping into that helicopter, and watching Malibu shrink behind me would finally close the book on my family. But families don't let stories end quietly, especially not sisters like Isabella. For a few days after the wedding, I lived in a bubble of peace. Adrian and I returned to our apartment in San Francisco, a high-rise with glass walls that overlooked the city. The skyline glowed at night, and for once I felt like the view matched how I felt inside. Limitless. I buried myself in work, debriefing cases, reviewing reports, living the double life I had carefully constructed, professional by day, private wife by night, no more pretending. But peace has a way of making you forget just how fast it can be ripped away. It started with a notification. One ping on my phone, then another, then a flood. Mentions, tags, direct messages. I opened my social media and froze. There it was, a post from Isabella. A glossy picture from her wedding, her in her gown, her husband smiling, my father mid-toast. And the caption? Some people need helicopters and fairy tales to distract from the truth. Don't believe everything you hear. Not all sisters are who they claim to be. The comment section erupted. Wait, is she talking about Claire? That FBI thing was fake, right? Honestly, I always thought Claire was a bit off. Helicopter? Who does that unless they're desperate for attention? Hundreds of likes, then thousands. The post spread like gasoline on dry brush. Soon it wasn't just her followers. It was gossip blogs, Twitter threads, even a Reddit forum dissecting my entire life. My credibility wasn't just questioned, it was shredded. Adrian found me pacing the living room, phone in hand, hands shaking. He read the post, his jaw tightening. "She's trying to rewrite the night," he said. "She's turning your reveal into a lie." I sank onto the couch, the leather cold against my skin, and people believe her. They've always believed her. I'm back to being the joke. It was like being shoved into the ocean all over again, except this time the waves were digital and endless. Strangers laughed at me, strangers mocked me, strangers debated whether I was real. For hours, I scrolled. Comment after comment, accusation after accusation. Some called me a fraud. Others spun conspiracies about Adrian paying actors to pose as FBI agents. Screenshots of me dripping wet at the wedding resurfaced, captioned with cruel jokes. Assistant Director of Saltwater Operations. My chest tightened, breath shallow. Even with years of training, even with my career built on handling pressure, nothing prepared me for this kind of attack. Because humiliation online isn't contained to a moment. It spreads, multiplies, lingers. Adrian knelt in front of me, his hands firm on mine. "Claire, look at me." His eyes were steady, unflinching. "This doesn't define you. She's trying to drag you back into the shadow. You've been here before, remember? You don't owe her the victory of silence." But I couldn't shake the fear. What if my work suffered because of this? What if colleagues saw the rumors and questioned me? In my line of work, reputation was everything. If trust cracked, even a little, years of effort could collapse. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, the city lights painting patterns across the room. My phone buzzed endlessly on the nightstand, but I didn't touch it. All I could hear was Isabella's voice, sharp and smug. Not all sisters are who they claim to be. She wanted the world to doubt me. She wanted to snatch back the spotlight I had stolen, even if only for one night. And it was working. But the thing about being underestimated your whole life? You learn to fight differently. The next morning, Adrian placed coffee on the table and said, "We fight back. Not with anger, with proof." I nodded, though doubt still clung to me. Proof, evidence. Those were things I understood. They were the foundation of everything I did at the Bureau. If Isabella wanted to turn this into a trial by public opinion, then I'd meet her in court, the court of truth. So I gathered everything. Our marriage certificate, my Bureau credentials, photos from years of service, cases I had led, commendations tucked away in boxes because I never thought I'd need to display them. Adrian coordinated with his PR team at Reed Technologies, drafting statements, preparing for backlash. But as I looked at the pile of evidence, something inside me whispered, "This isn't just about proving her wrong. This is about proving myself right. Because maybe deep down, a part of me still craved what I claimed I didn't: recognition, validation, respect. Not from strangers online, not even from my family, but from myself. The storm Isabella had unleashed wasn't just tearing at my reputation, it was forcing me to decide who I wanted to be. And this time, I wasn't going to be the silent sister in the background. This time, I was going to fight. The thing about lies is how fast they spread. By the second morning, Isabella's post wasn't just gossip. It was news. Articles with headlines like FBI or fraud. The sister scandal at Malibu filled my feed. Reporters dug through old photos, analyzing every detail as if they could uncover the truth in the tilt of my smile or the cut of a dress. And the worst part? I couldn't look away. Every scroll pulled me deeper. She's pretending. Total scam. Her husband probably staged the whole thing. If she really worked for the FBI, she wouldn't flaunt it at a wedding. Thousands of strangers writing my story for me, twisting it into something ugly. I sat on the floor of our apartment, back pressed against the cold glass wall, watching the city move below while I drowned above it. Adrian paced the room, phone pressed to his ear, speaking in clipped tones to lawyers, PR specialists, colleagues who knew the truth but needed reassurance. His voice was steady, but his shoulders carried the weight of both of us. "Claire," he said finally, lowering the phone, "we can end this." We hold a press conference, we show the documents, we set the record straight, but I didn't answer, because in that moment, I wasn't sure if I could face the world again. Do you know what self-doubt feels like? It isn't loud. It's quiet, insidious. It slips into your bloodstream, disguises itself as logic, whispers, maybe they're right. Maybe you are a fraud. I thought back to every time I'd been called a disappointment. The teacher who told me I'd never make it. The job interviews that ended with polite smiles but no callbacks. My father's voice, sharp with disgust, telling me Isabella was everything I wasn't. And now, here I was. 32 years old, sitting on the floor while strangers online tore apart the life I had built. Maybe they were just saying out loud what my family had always believed. Tears burned my eyes, but I blinked them back. I hated crying. Growing up, crying only made the ridicule worse. So instead, I pressed my palms hard against my knees, grounding myself, trying to breathe. Adrian crouched beside me, his voice softened. "Claire, you've handled interrogations, high-risk missions, rooms filled with people who wanted to break you. Don't tell me you're going to let your sister's lies undo all of that. I wanted to believe him. But online humiliation is different. It follows you, haunts you, multiplies while you sleep. In the field, I could see my enemy. Here, it was endless, faceless, relentless. That night, I had a dream I was back at the wedding. Only this time, when my father shoved me into the ocean, no one laughed. They just stood there, silent, while the tide dragged me under. I screamed, but no sound came out. And when I surfaced, gasping for air, everyone had already turned away. I woke up with my heart racing, sheets tangled, the city lights glaring through the window like spotlights. Adrian stirred beside me, but I slipped out of bed, pacing the apartment. The dream felt too real. It wasn't just about the wedding, it was about my entire life. Every time I had clawed my way up, there had been someone ready to push me back down. And yet, maybe that's exactly why I couldn't stop now. The morning sun poured across the room, turning the skyline gold. I stood in its glow, exhausted but alive, and whispered to myself, "You've survived worse than this. Don't let her win." Adrian walked in, coffee in hand, his eyes searching mine. I didn't need to speak. He nodded once, as if reading my mind. Then we fight. The decision felt like flipping a switch. The doubt didn't vanish, but it no longer ruled me. It was fuel now. If Isabella wanted to challenge my truth, I would meet her with everything she couldn't fake: proof, resilience, and the will to stand tall when the world wanted me to fall. Because drowning in doubt might feel like the end. But sometimes it's the moment you learn how to breathe underwater. The morning of the press conference, the city felt sharper, louder, as if every car horn and siren was reminding me what was at stake. I woke before sunrise, staring at the ceiling, my chest heavy with the weight of what was about to happen. By the time Adrian placed coffee on the table, my hands were already trembling. Not from caffeine, but from fear disguised as adrenaline. "You don't have to do this," he said quietly. "We could let the lawyers handle it." I shook my head. "If I hide, she wins. If I stay silent, the lie becomes the truth. I can't let that happen." So we dressed. Adrian in his signature black suit, crisp and commanding. Me in a simple navy dress, professional but unadorned. No glitter, no distraction, just clarity. My badge tucked into my pocket, my marriage certificate secured in a folder, evidence ready to be shown. By mid-morning, the building was buzzing. Reporters crammed into the lobby, cameras perched on tripods, flashes already popping like lightning. A line of microphones stretched across the podium. The air smelled of coffee, sweat, and tension. As Adrian and I stepped into the room, the chatter rose. "That's her." "Is that the sister?" "She doesn't look like FBI." 100 eyes pinned me in place, dissecting every movement, every breath. I paused for a heartbeat, grounding myself. My father's shove into the ocean replayed in my mind. The laughter, the shame. But this time, I wasn't dripping wet, gasping for air. This time I was ready. Adrian opened first, his voice steady. "Thank you for being here. There's been a narrative circulating, one built on lies, jealousy, and cruelty. Today we're here to set the record straight." He gestured toward me and the cameras swiveled. My throat tightened, but I stepped forward. "My name is Claire Reed," I began, voice low but growing stronger with each word. For most of my life, I've been underestimated. By strangers, by people I should have been able to trust, even by my own family. At my sister's wedding, I was publicly humiliated. And when the truth of my career and my marriage came to light, that humiliation turned into a campaign of lies. The room quieted, flashes stilled. Reporters leaned forward, pens hovering. I held up the folder. "This is our marriage certificate. Adrian is my husband. We chose to keep our relationship private because not everything in life needs to be for show." I said it on the podium. "And this," I pulled out my badge, the weight of it solid in my hand, "is proof of my service as assistant director in the FBE's counterintelligence division. It's not a prop, it's not a game, it's my life's work." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Cameras clicked furiously. A reporter in the front row raised her hand, but I didn't stop. For years I let other people define me. I let their words shrink me, their opinions silence me, but no more. The truth doesn't need embellishment. It stands on its own. Adrian stepped beside me, his presence like armor. "We are not here for sympathy," he said. "We are here because lies destroy reputations, families, and futures, and we refuse to let that happen." A man in the back shouted, "What about Isabella's claims?" "She says you staged everything." I lifted my chin. Ask yourself this. Who benefits from those lies? The sister who couldn't handle sharing her spotlight, or the woman who spent years serving her country in silence? The room buzzed with murmurs, but I didn't flinch. My voice was steady now, fueled by every scar I had carried. Another reporter asked, "What do you want people to take away from this?" I paused, letting the silence stretch just enough to matter. Then I said, "That truth will always outlast lies. That humiliation doesn't define you, your response does. And that no one, not even family, has the right to erase who you are. The applause was unexpected. Small at first, then louder, breaking through the tension. Not everyone clapped. Some scribbled notes, others frowned skeptically, but enough did. And in that sound, I felt something shift. The cameras flashed again, but this time I didn't feel exposed. I felt seen. As we stepped away from the podium, Adrian squeezed my hand. "You did it," he whispered. But I shook my head. "No, we did it together." Because the truth wasn't just about proving Isabella wrong. It was about reclaiming myself, about showing the world and myself that I was more than their whispers, more than their laughter, more than the girl shoved into the ocean. And for the first time in a long time, I believed it. When the press conference ended, the building emptied slowly, like a storm dispersing. Reporters packed their equipment, the hum of conversation faded, and the last camera flash died against the wall. Adrian and I walked out together, hand in hand, into the sharp light of late afternoon. For the first time in weeks, the noise around me felt quiet. We got into the car, the city sliding past in streaks of gray and gold. I leaned back against the seat, eyes closed, and exhaled. Not just a breath, but a release. For so long, my life had been about surviving humiliation, bracing for the next blow, proving myself in silence. Now, it was about something else entirely. Choosing freedom. That night, back in our apartment, the city lights stretched endlessly across the bay. Adrian poured us 2 glasses of wine, but I barely touched mine. I just stood by the window, forehead pressed against the glass, watching the lights flicker like tiny stories unfolding. And I thought about family. The word alone used to feel heavy, like a chain. Family meant expectation, judgment, silence when I needed support, laughter at my pain. But now, I realized something that took me 3 decades to learn. Family doesn't always mean blood. Sometimes it's the people who choose you, the ones who stand beside you when it's hard, who see you when others look away. I remembered my father's face at the wedding, frozen in shock. My mother clutching her pearls. Isabella, lips twisted, desperate to keep her crown. For years, I had begged silently for their approval. But as I stood in my apartment, the city alive beneath me, I felt lighter because I no longer needed it. The truth is, walking away doesn't erase the pain. It doesn't rewrite the past or make the scars disappear. But it gives you something better. The chance to build a life that isn't chained to someone else's opinion. I thought back to that night on the beach, salt water dripping from my hair, laughter echoing around me. I could still feel the sting of it, but I could also feel the moment I stood up, looked them in the eye, and said without words, "Remember this." That wasn't the night they broke me. That was the night I decided to stop playing their game. So when people ask me how I survived, how I endured the shove, the lies, the smear campaigns, I tell them this. Survival isn't about waiting for others to recognize your worth. It's about claiming it yourself, even if your voice shakes. As the night deepened, Adrian wrapped his arms around me, his voice soft in my ear. "You're free now," he said, and for once I believed it, because freedom doesn't always come in grand gestures. Sometimes it's a quiet choice, repeated day after day, to stop chasing the applause, to stop defending yourself to people who never listened, to start living as though your worth is already proven. And maybe that's the real ending to my story. Not the wedding, not the helicopter, not the press conference, but this, standing in my living room, looking out at a world that feels wide and possible, finally free of the weight of their approval. If you've ever felt small in your own family, if you've ever been the shadow instead of the favorite, I want you to know something. You don't have to wait for them to see you. You can walk away. You can build your own life, your own family, your own truth. And when you do, you'll realize what I did. Freedom isn't given, it's claimed.